You've been feeling it for a while now, like something already ended, but no one announced it. Not dramatically, not with noise, just a quiet shift in the background of your perception. And maybe you couldn't name it. Maybe you didn't even try. But when you heard the words Arcturian Portal, something inside you didn't react with curiosity. It reacted with recognition. Not because of the name, not because of the story around it, but because it matched a subtle change you've been noticing in yourself. This isn't about a location in space. It isn't about waiting for an event. It's about a threshold in awareness. And you've already crossed it. There's been a strange neutrality lately, moments where you expected to feel pulled and didn't. Situations that used to trigger urgency now just pass through. You still care, but not in the same way. It's as if something loosened its grip, and you didn't decide for that to happen. It simply did. That's the part that feels different. Because effort used to be involved, trying to align, trying to improve perception, trying to fix identity, trying to become the version of yourself that finally understands. But recently, something quieter began to unfold. Less trying, more noticing. Less seeking, more observing. And you may have wondered, is this detachment? Is this apathy? Or is this something else entirely? Hold that question for a moment. Because what was described as the portal was never about something opening out there. It was about something stabilizing in here. A field of consciousness that feels less reactive, more spacious. And when that field stabilizes, reality starts behaving differently, not because the world changed, but because the mirror became clearer. Around 3 minutes in, you might realize something subtle. This isn't about learning what the Arcturian Portal is. It's about noticing what already shifted in you when you stopped resisting your own perception. And there's more to that than it first appears. Have you noticed how time feels slightly altered? Not dramatically, just thinner. Days pass, but they don't stick the way they used to. Memories feel lighter. Future scenarios feel less solid. It's like the line between past and next has softened. You still move through your routine. You still make choices. But there's a growing awareness that choice feels different now. Less pressured, more precise. As if the field around you responds faster, not to effort, to clarity. And clarity doesn't come from forcing belief. It comes from relaxing identity. There's been a quiet questioning happening under the surface. If I'm not my reactions, if I'm not the story I've been repeating, then what exactly is moving through this experience? You didn't ask that out loud, but you felt it, especially in moments of stillness, especially in silence, especially when something that should have bothered you didn't. That's not numbness, it's recalibration. And recalibration rarely feels dramatic. It feels like nothing at first. There's a part of you that used to define itself through contrast, through struggle, through resistance, through pushing against what felt misaligned. But what happens when the pushing stops? What happens when you notice that suffering was never punishment? Just a sign that perception had drifted? No one told you that directly. You felt it in small, almost forgettable moments. Moments where you chose differently without announcing it. Moments where you didn't chase validation. Moments where you let something go without needing closure. That's alignment, not loud, not dramatic, just natural. Like gravity. And when alignment becomes natural, reality doesn't feel like something to conquer. It feels like something reflecting. Pause for a second. Notice how this doesn't feel like new information. It feels like language catching up to something you've already sensed. And there's a deeper layer beneath that. The idea of a portal suggests entry. But what if the entry was into a version of yourself that was always parallel to this one? Not higher, not better, just less entangled. There are versions of you that react, versions that strive, versions that wait. And then there's the version that simply observes and chooses from clarity. You've brushed against that version recently, maybe during a quiet morning, maybe in the middle of conflict when you felt strangely steady. Maybe while looking at your own reflection and not fully recognizing the identity you used to defend so strongly, that moment wasn't random. It was alignment intersecting awareness. And once that intersection happens, even briefly, you can't fully go back. Not because you're trapped, but because you've felt the difference between forcing your path and allowing your path to reflect you. Around 10 minutes in, something else settles. You're not waiting for change anymore. And that realization has layers you haven't fully explored yet. There used to be a sense that something big was coming, a shift, an awakening, an external confirmation that your inner work meant something. But what if the confirmation wasn't an event? What if it was the absence of urgency? Notice how anticipation has softened, not disappeared, soft as. There's less obsession with timelines, less attachment to proving your awareness. Almost like you've stopped negotiating with the future. And when you stop negotiating with time, time behaves differently. It stretches, it bends, not physically, experientially. Moments feel more complete on their own. You don't need them to lead somewhere. That's new. Or maybe it's familiar. From long ago, before identity became heavy, before effort felt necessary. Here's something you may not have articulated. You don't feel as threatened by uncertainty anymore. You still prefer clarity. You still plan. But uncertainty doesn't destabilize your sense of self the way it once did. Why? Because your identity is no longer anchored in outcomes. It's anchored in awareness. And awareness doesn't need control to feel stable. It just needs presence. The Arcturian Portal wasn't a doorway in the sky. It was a shift in how you hold your own perception. Less gripping, more allowing. And when perception relaxes, the mirror changes. Reality starts to echo your inner neutrality instead of amplifying your fear. That doesn't mean challenges. It means they don't define you. Take a breath. Not because you're instructed to, but because you probably just noticed you already did. That's awareness adjusting in real time. There's also something happening collectively, quietly. People you've never met are experiencing similar neutrality, similar detachment from drama, similar shifts in identity, not through coordination, through resonance. It's like a field adjusting its baseline frequency. No announcement, no central event, just individual awareness stabilizing. Simultaneously, you might have sensed that too. In conversations that feel different, in conflicts that dissolve faster, in the way old narratives no longer grip the collective the way they once did. It's subtle, but undeniable. And when a field shifts even slightly, every mirror within it reflects differently. You are not separate from that field. You are it, experiencing itself through a particular lens. And lately, your lens has become clearer. Not perfect, clearer. Around 20 minutes in, something else becomes undeniable. You're no longer trying to become someone. You're remembering how to stop pretending you aren't already aligned. And that recognition doesn't need applause. It needs space. There was a time when growth felt like climbing. Now it feels like uncovering, peeling away the urgency, peeling away the fear of missing your path, peeling away the belief that alignment requires effort. Alignment isn't achieved. It's allowed. An allowance feels quiet, almost invisible, but incredibly stable. Have you noticed how you recover faster from emotional turbulence? How you observe your own thoughts without immediately identifying with them? How certain triggers simply don't land? That's not suppression. It's integration. Parts of you that used to compete are now cooperating. And when internal conflict softens, external conflict loses intensity. The mirror follows. It always has. You're just more aware of it now. There's a subtle invitation here not to do anything, but to notice something. When you think about the future now, does it feel like a battle or like an unfolding? You don't have to answer out loud. Your nervous system already knows. Some would say a portal implies passage into higher states. But what if it simply marked the moment you stopped abandoning your own awareness? The moment you trusted your perception over external validation. The moment you realized suffering was misalignment, not punishment. And misalignment is temporary. It corrects when you stop resisting what you feel. That correction doesn't require ritual. It requires honesty. Honesty about what resonates. Honesty about what drains you. Honesty about which identity feels natural and which feels forced. And you've been practicing that honesty quietly, in small decisions, in subtle boundaries, in the way you no longer over-explain yourself. That's the change. Not cosmic fireworks, not dramatic ascension, just a stable shift in consciousness that feels like coming home to your own field. If any of this feels familiar, it's because you've been living it, not learning it, living it. And maybe that's why something about this moment feels complete, not finished, complete, as if a cycle closed internally. And instead of excitement, there's calm. Instead of urgency, there's clarity. Instead of seeking, there's recognition. There's one more layer. You might have noticed that reflection in others too. Moments where someone reacts and you don't match their intensity. Moments where someone projects fear and you feel compassion instead of defense. That's not superiority, it's stability. You're less entangled in the collective emotional turbulence. Not because you disconnected, because you centered. And centering doesn't isolate you, it clarifies you. When you're clear, your field becomes coherent. And coherence subtly influences the mirrors around you. Not forcefully, naturally, like tuning forks aligning when one stabilizes. No effort required. Somewhere along the way, you stopped asking, when will it happen? And started noticing it already did. Not as an event, as a shift in baseline awareness. The portal language just gave shape to something that was already unfolding inside you. Language can point, but it cannot create the shift. The shift was yours, quietly, individually, and collectively at the same time. There's a reason the idea of parallel realities resonates lately, not as fantasy, as felt experience, because you've sensed that different versions of you are accessible through different states of alignment. When you are reactive, you experience one path. When you are centered, another path becomes visible. Not because reality rearranges magically, but because perception filters differently. And perception is the gateway to identity. There's a book some have explored called Parallel Realities, not as instruction, more as a mirror. A way of articulating what it feels like when you realize you're not locked into one version of yourself. You've probably sensed that too. The fluidity, the subtle branching of choice, not dramatic forks in the road, micro adjustments in awareness, and those micro adjustments change everything quietly. Here's something gentle to sit with. What if nothing is missing? What if the feeling of almost there was just the mind catching up to what your consciousness already stabilized? No pressure in that question, just space. You don't need to call it an Arcturian portal. You don't need to label it at all. You just know something settled, something aligned, something clarified. And the world looks slightly different now. Not brighter, not darker, just more reflective. As if reality finally stopped arguing with you. Or maybe you stopped arguing with it. Either way, the friction decreased. And in that decreased friction, there's peace. Not passive peace, active, aware stillness. The kind that doesn't demand proof. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that feels like you've stepped into the version of yourself that was always watching patiently, waiting for you to relax. And maybe that's the quiet truth beneath all of this. You were never behind. You were never off your path. You were navigating through layers of perception until the mirror cleared. Now, when you look at your life, it doesn't feel like a test. It feels like a reflection, and reflections don't judge, they reveal. What they reveal depends on what you bring to them. Lately, you've been bringing neutrality, clarity, honest awareness. So the reflections soften, not because the world changed, because you did. Without forcing it, without announcing it, without needing anyone else to confirm it. You can feel it now, can't you? Not as excitement, as steadiness. A grounded sense that whatever unfolds next isn't something you have to chase. It's something that meets you where you already are, and where you are is aligned, not perfectly, but genuinely. There's a difference, and you've felt that difference long before this video gave it words. So maybe nothing here was new. Maybe it was just a mirror, reflecting back the shift you already sensed. And if you sit with that for a moment, not analyzing it, not trying to define it, you might notice something simple. You're not waiting anymore. You're here, fully, and that changes everything. You noticed it again today. That quiet pause between one thought and the next. It used to feel empty. Now it feels full, not crowded, not overwhelming. Just complete in a way that doesn't ask for commentary, and that's new. Or maybe it isn't new. Maybe you just stopped overlooking it. There was a time when silence felt like something to fill, a gap, a delay before the real moment started. Now silence feels like the real moment. Everything else feels like movement inside it. That shift didn't come with fireworks. It came with subtle rearrangements in how you relate to your own mind. You're less impressed by dramatic thoughts, less intimidated by heavy emotions, less seduced by extreme narratives. They still appear, but they don't own the field the way they once did. And that field is you, not your personality, not your history, not your preferences. The awareness underneath all of that, the one that watches, the one that chooses, the one that doesn't panic when identity begins to loosen. Because something about identity has been softening too. You felt it. Roles you used to defend now feel negotiable. Opinions that once defined you now feel flexible. Paths you thought were permanent now feel adjustable. Not because you're lost, because you're less rigid. And rigidity was never your true nature. It was protection. Protection against uncertainty. Protection against rejection. Protection against not knowing who you were. But what if not knowing was never the threat? What if it was the opening? There's a subtle difference between confusion and spaciousness. Confusion feels chaotic. Spaciousness feels open. And lately, when old certainties dissolve, it feels more like openness than chaos. That's not random. That's consciousness reorganizing itself around alignment instead of fear. You didn't wake up one day and decide to trust your perception more. You simply grew tired of overriding it. That exhaustion was important. It wasn't weakness. It was a signal. A signal that forcing reality to match expectation was more draining than allowing reality to reflect your state. So something relaxed. You stopped pushing as hard. And when you stopped pushing, the mirror stopped resisting. There's something almost humbling about that. Realizing that the friction wasn't coming from the world. It was coming from the tension inside perception. Once perception softened, the world felt less confrontational. Not because problems disappeared, because identity stopped fighting every reflection. You may have noticed this in conversations. Someone speaks from fear. You hear it, but you don't absorb it. It passes through your awareness without embedding. That didn't used to happen. Before, you would internalize it, react to it, carry it for hours. Now it moves. That's alignment stabilizing. Not as a peak experience, as a baseline. And baselines are quiet. They don't announce themselves. They simply become normal. Which is why part of you might underestimate what has shifted. Because it feels natural. But natural doesn't mean small. It means integrated. There's a deeper layer beneath this. You're no longer negotiating your worth through outcomes. There was a time when success validated you, when failure destabilized you, when recognition amplified your identity. Now outcomes feel like feedback, not judgment. Feedback from a mirror that reflects your current alignment. If something flows, you notice the resonance. If something resists, you notice the misalignment, but neither defines who you are. That's new. Or maybe that's remembered. Because before you learned to measure yourself through external approval, there was a simpler state. You acted because it felt natural. You chose because it felt aligned. You didn't ask if it would secure your identity. You just moved. That simplicity has been returning, quietly. You see it in how you make decisions faster now. Not rushed. Clear. There's less overthinking, less internal debate. When something feels aligned, you move. When it doesn't, you pause. Not dramatically, just honestly. And honesty with yourself has become more important than being understood by others. That's a significant shift in the field of your awareness, because when self-trust stabilizes, external validation loses its grip. You still appreciate it, but you don't depend on it. Dependence created tension. Appreciation creates openness. And openness feels like space to respond instead of react, space to observe instead of absorb, space to choose instead of default. That space might be what the portal was pointing toward. Not a doorway somewhere beyond the stars, a doorway inside perception, a shift from reacting within a narrow identity to observing from a wider field. When the field widens, reality doesn't feel as personal, not in a detached way, in a liberating way. You stop interpreting everything as commentary about you. Events become movements within the collective field of consciousness. You participate, but you're not threatened. That sense of threat used to shape many of your choices. Subtly, you might not have called it fear, but it was there. Fear of being left behind, fear of choosing wrong, fear of not fulfilling your path. Now the concept of wrong path feels softer, almost outdated, because you've started to sense that every version of you exists as a possibility, and the one you experience aligns with the state you embody, not as punishment, not as reward, as reflection. If you shift internally, the reflection shifts. You've tested this without realizing it. On small scales, a mood change alters how the day unfolds. A decision from clarity opens unexpected ease. A reaction from tension invites friction. It's not mystical, it's experiential. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. You begin to understand that the field you move through is responsive, not obedient, responsive to your state, to your alignment, to your awareness. That realization doesn't inflate you, it grounds you, because it means responsibility isn't about control. It's about coherence. When you are coherent inside, the reflections outside become clearer. And coherence isn't perfection, it's honesty. You don't have to eliminate doubt. You just have to stop pretending it isn't there. You don't have to force confidence. You just have to align with what feels true. Truth in this sense isn't universal doctrine. It's resonance. What feels natural in your nervous system, what expands instead of contracts, what steadies instead of agitates. You've been following that more lately, even if you haven't labeled it. There's also been a reduction in internal noise. Not silence, reduction. Old repetitive thoughts have less momentum. Old resentments feel lighter. Old ambitions feel more refined. It's like your inner landscape has reorganized itself. Not dramatically, subtly, and subtle shifts often carry the deepest transformation because they don't shock the system, they recalibrate it. Recalibration doesn't ask for attention. It simply becomes the new normal, which might be why you're only now recognizing how different you feel. Not different in personality, different in baseline, less reactive, more stable, less defensive, more curious, less desperate for answers, more comfortable with not knowing. That comfort with not knowing is significant. It means you trust the unfolding of time more than you used to. Time no longer feels like something chasing you. It feels like something you're walking within, and walking implies presence. You're here, not waiting for a future version of yourself to finally arrive. That arrival energy has softened because you've realized you were never absent. You were just distracted. Distracted by effort, distracted by comparison, distracted by narratives about what awakening was supposed to look like. Now it looks ordinary, calm, integrated, almost invisible. And that invisibility is comforting because it means the shift wasn't performance. It was internal. The collective is experiencing this too. You sense it in the way conversations are changing. Less tolerance for extremes. More appreciation for nuance. More people stepping back from constant outrage. It's not universal, but it's noticeable. Like a field slowly stabilizing after turbulence. When turbulence decreases, clarity returns, and clarity doesn't shout, it steadies. You are part of that steadiness. Not because you forced yourself into it, because you stopped resisting it. There's a quiet maturity in that, a sense that growth doesn't require constant striving. It requires listening, listening to your own alignment, listening to the feedback of the mirror, listening to the subtle signals in your body when something feels right or off. You've been listening more and speaking less from impulse. Even your words feel more intentional, more grounded, as if you no longer need to fill space with explanation. Silence feels sufficient, and sufficiency feels peaceful. You might notice, too, that certain desires have shifted. Not disappeared, shifted. Ambitions that once carried urgency now feel like preferences you can hold lightly. You still move toward what resonates, but you don't feel incomplete without it. That's freedom, not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you don't feel trapped by your own expectation. There's something else beneath this. You're less afraid of your own depth. There were parts of you avoided before, emotions you postponed, questions you didn't want to face. Now, when they surface, you don't recoil as quickly. You observe, you breathe, you allow. Allowance changes everything, because what you allow integrates, what you resist persists. And you've experienced both. You've felt how resistance tightens reality, and how allowance softens it. The so-called portal wasn't about entering a new world. It was about allowing this one to reflect you more clearly. And clarity doesn't require spectacle. It requires presence. Presence you've been cultivating without ceremony, without announcement, just through daily awareness, through small choices, through moments of honesty when no one was watching. That's the kind of shift that changes everything. Not because it alters the external landscape overnight, but because it changes how you walk through it. And when how you walk changes, the path feels different. Not because the path moved, because you did. This isn't a destination. It's a stabilization, a settling into a version of yourself that doesn't need constant proof, and that version feels familiar, as if it's been there the entire time, waiting for you to stop searching, waiting for you to stop trying to become, waiting for you to simply be. And now that you are, even imperfectly, even gradually, there's less noise, less friction, less urgency, more space, more clarity, more quiet confidence. You may not call it an awakening. You may not call it anything, but you feel it. And that feeling is enough. There's a different kind of stability settling in now. Not the stability that comes from certainty, the kind that comes from familiarity with uncertainty. You don't need everything mapped out the way you once did. You still think ahead. You still imagine possibilities. But there's less tension wrapped around the outcome. It's as if you've stopped trying to control the reflection and started refining the source. And the source is subtle. It isn't your personality. It isn't your goals. It's the state you occupy before thought forms. That quiet orientation underneath reaction. You've become more aware of it lately. You notice when it contracts. You notice when it opens. And without making a ceremony out of it, you adjust. Not through force, through alignment. Alignment doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like small internal corrections, like tuning something slightly out of place. No one else sees it, but you feel the coherence return. There was a time when you would override those subtle signals. You would say yes when your body said no. You would push forward when your energy felt misaligned. You would stay silent when something in you wanted to speak. Now there's less betrayal of yourself. That's not rebellion, it's integration. You've realized that your perception isn't random noise. It's feedback from the field you're moving through. And when you honor that feedback, the field responds differently. Again, not magically, naturally. There's also something else you've probably noted. You don't feel as fascinated by chaos anymore. Drama used to feel stimulating. Intensity used to feel meaningful. Now intensity often feels like distortion. You can sense when something is inflated by fear. You can sense when something is amplified by collective tension. And instead of diving in, you observe. Observation used to feel passive. Now it feels powerful. Because observation shifts your relationship to what you're perceiving. When you observe without immediate identification, space opens. In that space, choice exists. Choice isn't loud, it's subtle. It's the microsecond where you decide whether to react or remain centered. You've been choosing center more often, not always, but more often. And that frequency matters because frequency stabilizes identity, not the identity shaped by external labels, the identity rooted in awareness, the one that doesn't panic when the narrative shifts, the one that doesn't collapse when plans change, the one that can stand in uncertainty without needing to fill it with assumption. You may have even felt a strange kind of gratitude recently, not for a specific achievement, for clarity, for the simple fact that your inner landscape feels less fragmented. There's less internal contradiction, less arguing with yourself, less oscillation between extremes. It's not that you've eliminated complexity. You've become comfortable holding it. That comfort radiates outward. People respond to you differently. Conversations feel less charged. Or sometimes they feel charged, but you don't mirror the charge. And when you don't mirror it, something shifts. Not always visibly, but energetically, the field adjusts around coherence. That's not mystical language. It's experiential truth. You've seen it. When you enter a room calm, the room often softens. When you enter reactive, the tension spreads. You are not separate from the collective field. You influence it simply by being aligned within it. And lately, alignment feels less like effort and more like default. That's the real change, default. You used to default to overthinking. Now you default to noticing. You used to default to preparing for worst case outcomes. Now you default to trusting your ability to respond in real time. Trust in real time changes your relationship with time itself. The future feels less threatening when you trust your present awareness, and trust doesn't mean blind optimism. It means familiarity with your own resilience. You've seen yourself handle what you once feared. You've seen yourself recover from misalignment. You've seen yourself grow without forcing growth. That builds quiet confidence. Not the kind that needs recognition, the kind that doesn't require it. There's another layer here. You're less interested in convincing anyone of your perspective. There was a time when being right felt stabilizing. Now being aligned feels more important than being right. And alignment doesn't argue, it expresses. If someone resonates, the exchange flows. If they don't, you don't collapse. That neutrality is new, or remembered. Because before identity became something to defend, it was something to explore. You're exploring again, not externally, internally, exploring what feels authentic, exploring what feels forced, exploring where your energy expands. And expansion isn't excitement, it's spaciousness. There's room to breathe inside your own experience, room to adjust without shame, room to shift without labeling yourself inconsistent. You understand now that identity isn't fixed. It's fluid within the field of consciousness, and fluidity isn't instability. It's adaptability. When you adapt from awareness rather than fear, change feels natural. That's why the idea of parallel versions of yourself no longer feels abstract. You've experienced how different you feel depending on your state. You felt how one decision from clarity opens a different path than one decision from tension. Not because fate rearranges itself dramatically, because perception filters the field differently. You're beginning to live from that understanding without needing to preach it, without needing to frame it, just living it. There's also less urgency around awakening itself. You're not chasing higher states. You're not measuring your consciousness against some imagined scale. You're simply here, aware, present, curious. And that simplicity feels complete. Not complete as in finished, complete as in whole. Nothing missing in this moment, even if circumstances aren't perfect. Even if questions remain unanswered, there's a steadiness beneath the questions. And that steadiness is enough. You might notice that when old fears surface now, they feel almost familiar, like echoes rather than threats. They don't dominate the field, they pass through it. Because the field is wider, you expanded, not outward, inward, into awareness. into acceptance, into alignment. The so-called portal wasn't a gateway to something foreign. It was a reminder that the field you move through is responsive to your state, and your state is yours to inhabit consciously, not control. Inhabit. That's the subtle power here. Not domination over reality, coherence within it, and coherence radiates. Even if you never speak about it, even if no one names it, it's felt. In the way you pause before reacting, in the way you listen more fully, in the way you let conversations end without forcing closure, in the way you forgive yourself faster. Self-forgiveness might be one of the clearest signs of this shift. You don't hold your past mistakes as tightly. You see them as previous alignments, states you once occupied, not permanent definitions of who you are. That perspective frees energy. Energy that used to be trapped in regret now becomes available for presence. Presence feels lighter, more efficient, more precise. There's less wasted motion inside you, less internal resistance, less friction against what is. Acceptance doesn't mean passivity. It means starting from clarity instead of denial. When you start from clarity, your choices carry different weight. They feel intentional rather than reactive. You may have noticed that certain relationships have subtly recalibrated. Some feel closer, some feel more distant, but the shifts don't feel dramatic. They feel organic, like branches adjusting toward light. You're not forcing connections. You're allowing resonance. Resonance guides more than logic now. Not blindly, sensitively. You trust your perception of energy. You trust how environments feel. You trust the signals your body gives. That trust stabilizes your path without rigid planning. And here's something gentle to consider. If nothing external changed tomorrow, if circumstances stayed exactly as they are, would you still feel this steadiness? If the answer is yes, even partially, then you already understand what shifted. It wasn't the world. It was your relationship to it. You stopped fighting the mirror. You stopped demanding proof. You stopped chasing arrival. And in that stopping, something opened. Not dramatically, quietly. A stable awareness that you are not behind, not separate, not lost. Just unfolding within a responsive field of consciousness, and the unfolding doesn't require spectacle. It requires presence. You're present more than you used to be. And that presence feels like home, not a place, a state. A state you carry, a state that shapes perception, a state that subtly shapes reality, not through force, through alignment, through coherence, through simple, honest awareness. And the more you rest there, the less you need to search. There's something almost imperceptible happening now, not outside, inside the way you interpret what's outside. You used to look at your life and ask, what does this mean for me? Now the question is quieter, almost unnecessary. Events unfold. Conversations happen, plans shift. And instead of immediately translating everything into identity, you let it be what it is. That space between event and interpretation has widened. It may be the most important shift of all, because interpretation used to define your emotional reality. A delayed message meant rejection. A mistake meant failure. A detour meant you were off your path. Now a delayed message is just a delay. A mistake is information. A detour is movement. The drama drained out of the narrative. Not because life became simple, because perception became clearer. Clear perception doesn't distort neutral events into personal threats. It sees, it registers. It chooses a response without collapsing into reaction. And the more you live from that clarity, the more the world feels less hostile, less unpredictable. Not because unpredictability disappeared, because you no longer interpret unpredictability as danger. That changes the entire field of experience. You might have noticed how quickly you return to center now. Something happens, there's a ripple, but it doesn't spiral the way it used to. You recalibrate faster, like your nervous system remembers stability, as if stability has become your default setting instead of anxiety. That didn't happen by accident. It wasn't forced. It stabilized over time as you stopped feeding the patterns that once defined you. You stopped rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You stopped replaying conversations in your head for hours. You stopped trying to control how others perceive you. And without those constant rehearsals, your internal field grew quieter. Quieter doesn't mean empty, it means coherent. Coherence is subtle, but powerful. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin aligning instead of contradicting each other, energy frees up. You feel less scattered, less divided, more whole. Wholeness doesn't feel dramatic, it feels natural. Like standing upright after years of leaning without noticing. There's also a softness now, not weakness, softness. You judge yourself less harshly. You judge others less quickly. You've seen enough of your own inner complexity to know everyone is navigating their own layers of perception. That awareness breeds compassion, not the performative kind. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to be displayed. You can disagree without hostility. You can detach without resentment. You can care without clinging. That balance once felt impossible. Now it feels intuitive, and intuition has become louder than fear. Not in volume, in authority. You trust the subtle signals more than the loud narratives. You trust how something feels in your body more than how it looks on paper. You trust alignment over pressure. Pressure used to convince you to move. Now resonance does. If something resonates, you step toward it. If it doesn't, you let it pass. Without drama, without needing to justify. That's freedom at a level that doesn't need permission. You've also noticed that comparison has lost its grip. You still see what others are doing, but it doesn't destabilize you. Their path doesn't threaten yours, because you no longer believe there's only one version of success. You sense that every individual is moving through their own alignment process, and yours doesn't have to look like anyone else's. That realization dissolves a lot of silent pressure, pressure to prove, pressure to catch up, pressure to perform growth. Now growth feels private, internal, measured by coherence rather than applause. There's something almost invisible about this shift. If someone looked at your life from the outside, they might not see dramatic changes. But inside, the architecture of your awareness has reorganized. The foundation is steadier. The walls are less rigid. The windows are clearer. Light enters differently. You don't brace yourself as much. You don't anticipate collapse. You don't search for hidden threats in every opportunity. Opportunities feel lighter. Challenges feel workable. Neutral moments feel sufficient. Sufficiency might be the quiet word beneath all of this. Enough. You feel enough. Not perfect, not complete in some final sense, but not lacking. And when you stop operating from lack, reality stops reflecting lack back to you in the same way. You see possibilities where you once saw obstacles. You see lessons where you once saw punishment. You see reflection where you once saw randomness. It's not that everything has meaning in some grand design. It's that your perception has become less adversarial. You're no longer fighting the field you exist within. You're cooperating with it. And cooperation feels smoother than resistance ever did. There's another layer you may be sensing now. The idea that you were never meant to escape this world. You were meant to see it clearly. The portal was never an exit. It was an adjustment in how you participate. Instead of feeling trapped in circumstances, you feel engaged with them. Instead of feeling like a victim of time, you feel present within it. Time doesn't rush you the way it used to. You move with it, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but without the constant background anxiety that you're running out. That anxiety used to drive many of your decisions. Now decisions feel more intentional, less reactive. You pause more often before speaking. You consider more before committing, not because you're hesitant, because you value alignment. Alignment has become your compass, and compasses don't shout, they point. You follow the subtle pull toward what feels coherent, even if it doesn't make immediate logical sense, even if it contradicts your old plans, because you've seen that when you ignore alignment, friction increases, and when you honor it, flow returns. Flow doesn't mean ease in every detail. It means movement without internal resistance. And internal resistance used to be exhausting. You carried it in your shoulders. in your chest, in your thoughts before sleep. Now there's more rest, even when life is busy, even when questions remain. Rest inside activity, calm inside motion. That paradox once seemed impossible, now it feels natural. You may also sense that this awareness isn't exclusive to you. It's emerging quietly in many people. Conversations are shifting. There's less appetite for constant outrage, less fascination with extremes, more interest in clarity, more openness to nuance. It's not everywhere, but it's spreading, like a subtle recalibration in the collective field. Each individual who stabilizes internally contributes to that shift, not by preaching, by embodying. And you've been embodying more than you realize, just by choosing coherence over chaos, just by choosing awareness over autopilot, just by choosing honesty over performance. There's something deeply grounding about recognizing that nothing supernatural had to happen for this shift to occur. No external event, no dramatic revelation, just gradual alignment, gradual honesty, gradual relaxation of identity. And that gradual shift changed everything, not in spectacle, in texture. Life feels textured differently now, less sharp in the wrong places, more defined in the right ones. You feel defined without feeling confined. That's subtle, but profound. You're not dissolving into abstraction. You're becoming more precise, more intentional, more aware of how your state influences your path. And you don't need to label it. You don't need to explain it. You just live it. There's a quiet confidence in that. Not the kind that announces itself, the kind that doesn't need to. If someone asked you what changed, you might struggle to articulate it because it wasn't a single insight, it was a remembering. A remembering that your consciousness is not at the mercy of external conditions. A remembering that perception shapes experience more than circumstance alone. A remembering that alignment feels lighter than force, and that lightness is sustainable. You don't burn out as quickly. You don't obsess as intensely. You don't cling as tightly. You engage, you release, you recalibrate, and you continue. There's no grand finale here, no climactic resolution, just awareness unfolding, quietly, steadily, as if this conversation was never about information, it was about recognition. You didn't need to be convinced. You needed to hear something that matched what you were already sensing. And now that you've heard it, or rather, felt it articulated, there's a deeper stillness settling in. Not because everything is solved, but because nothing was fundamentally broken. You were never behind, never disconnected, never truly lost. You were navigating layers of perception. And now the layers feel thinner, more transparent, more honest. The field around you hasn't transformed into something otherworldly. It feels familiar, responsive, reflective. You walk through it differently now, with less tension, with more awareness, with quiet trust. And as this moment ends, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a continuation, like the awareness will keep unfolding long after the words stop. You'll move through your day, you'll encounter ordinary moments, and somewhere inside them, you'll feel it again, that steadiness, that clarity, that subtle recognition that nothing external needed to change for everything to feel different. And you won't need to name it. You'll just notice,